So yeah, I sort of got a bit ahead of myself slightly because I was hoping to get onto this. But you've seen the skull now. The story of this, it was found in a cave in 1930 by a young teenage girl. It eventually ended up in the hands of Melanie Young. I've got a clip of that here. And is it even from Earth? Found in this area of Mexico, 100 miles southwest of Chihuahua, in a cave, dated to be 900 years old. And I've just got a clip from UFO Hunters from 2009. I think, have I got it here? Or maybe I haven't. But this is Melanie Young, who owns the skull, but fortunately it's become a very sad story, really, of what's happened, and I've written it up in the acknowledged book. So, 2 skulls were discovered in this cave by this young girl, a human skull and the so-called Star Child skull. And it was carbon dated, 900 years old, plus or minus 40 years. It was carbon dated twice, as were both skulls. Melanie Young in 1999 passed it over to Lloyd Pye, who'd done a lot of work looking at Bigfoot, hominoids, Sasquatch. He knew a lot about the morphology of things like the Miocene apes and all the precursor humans and the pre-humans and the hominids. And so when he saw the Star Child skull, he knew it was very weird. Melanie Young worked with as a neonatal nurse, so she worked with neonates with newborns, and she knew from the shape of the skull it wasn't hydrocephaly, or so she said back in 1999. So there's a sort of human on the top, Star Child on the bottom. There's 25 major physical differences between the human skull and the Star Child skull. The Star Child has no brow ridges. The bones are reconfigured, the zygomatic arches are different, the eye sockets are only ½ an inch deep, the ear canal is in a different place relative to humans. It has this crease or this dent which you might have noticed when you were handling it, and that proves it's not hydrocephalic, despite what it says on Wikipedia and similar sites, which declares it as a human deformed skull. It's not deformed, perfectly symmetric. What you handled was a plastic replica, but it's made from the real skull. With X-rays, you will see that this skull wasn't cradle boarded. You can see that this human skull that was found with it was cradle boarded, a very straight line there. And this has got convolutions and things and lumps and bumps. It has no inion. One of the only skulls not to have an inion bone. All human skulls have an inion bone. It sort of sticks out the back of your skull. You can feel it. Everyone has an inion. It's not a skull of a hydrocephalic, which is they always try and say this because that's what a hydrocephalic child looks like, and you have this creased dent, and these bones are fused. They don't fuse, certainly not as well as this fuses, in something that develops hydrocephaly. And these bones are fused, as you can see. And there's the comparative X-ray between the human skull and the Star Child. You can see there's no similarity, other than it's got 2 eye sockets. This sort of cauliflower type appearance here, those are the human sinuses. Star Child skull doesn't have any sinuses, which is extremely rare. When Lloyd first heard about that, he thought that that was proof that this was an alien, because but there are some humans that are born without sinuses, but it's very rare. It's very rare. And they try to say it's a progeria victim, it's hydrocephaly, it's what's the other one? I can't remember. There's a couple of other syndromes where you get a deformed bone structure. They try to say it's that. And you see these sort of eye sockets are totally different, the way that the bone structure is there. And the other problem for the skeptics with this particular skull, and this is the real skull in the picture here because these were bone samples that were taken for DNA tests. That's a human skull with 9mm thickness bone. This is a Star Child, 3mm thick. Yet it is much stronger than human bone. They had to use a Dremel blade. So if you get human bone which you want to dissolve for DNA testing, put it in a test tube and it dissolves in 24 hours, that's fine, that's what normally happens. You get the bone from that other skull, it doesn't dissolve in a week. That ain't no human bone. Not even close. Chemical composition is different. It's more like collagen. The Star Child skull's bone has been tested, I think more than once, and it's more like tooth enamel. It's not like human bone. DNA tests were done between the period of 1999 and 2012, and basically there was sort of conflicting information. You read conflicting information online, but the latest tests that were done in 2010, the earlier tests were done with primers, and they couldn't recover the star child's DNA, nuclear DNA. There's two types of DNA, there's mitochondrial and nuclear. The early tests couldn't recover the star child's nuclear DNA, but they also did the test on the human skull that was found with it, which was the same age, and they recovered human DNA by the same technique using the same primers back in 2003. They couldn't recover the star child's DNA, which meant almost certainly it wasn't human. A further test was done in 2012 with different techniques, using a technique called shotgunning, I think is the correct technique. And over a period of about 2 years, it was found that by statistical projections they didn't recover all of the DNA, but the star child's FOXP2 gene was found, and in the whole of the human population you can only have a difference of 2 sequences within the human FOXP2 gene for the whole of the human population, and each of those 2 differences cause genetic problems. One means that you can't speak, and the other is fatal. By statistical projections, they worked out, for example, that well, what they discovered was a star child's FOXP2 gene had 56 differences to the human. 56. So the star child's DNA, I think, was about 50% the same as human DNA, whereas chimp's DNA is 98% the same as ours. But the star child, statistically, they didn't recover all of it. By the best measurements they had, it was 50% the same as humans. So the geneticist who did this, who's remained anonymous by the way, the probability, he said, the probability that such a highly specific arrangement of changes in a small fragment could have occurred by accumulation of sequencing errors is extremely low, if not close to 0. Nor could this arrangement have occurred due to contamination with the DNA of any known species. From this evidence, one may conclude that the underlying biochemistry of the entity's life form must be either the same as or highly similar to humans or other species. Yet, the use of the genetic code, which still remains universal, is distinctively different, implying that this life form is very likely the result of a markedly variant and non-intersecting evolutionary process. Conclusion, it's not from around here, not from this planet.
How did you come into possession of the skull?
Well, a friend who got it from a friend who was the original owner of it gave it to me due to my expertise in neonatal nursing and anatomy. When I saw it and told them that this is totally out of this world, they were like, take it, don't bring it back.
If it were a hydrocephalic, this would be bulged out, okay? But only one side would be bulged out, or the back would be bulged. It wouldn't be symmetrical like that is.
So a hydrocephalic skull is asymmetrical.
It's asymmetrical.
And this skull is symmetrical.
It's completely symmetrical. If that were a hydrocephalic, the bones would not be connected. There would be no skull.
What other explanation do you have for this skull?
I don't have one. I can't find one.
I'm really excited to meet with David Aguilar because David Aguilar has written a number of books for National Geographic on what's going on out there in the solar system and what other life forms may look like.
We are talking to NASA, we're talking to the Origins of Life Initiative here at Harvard. We're actively searching for life in the universe.
This really elevates our investigation to have a Harvard scientist weigh in and talk to us about the real possibilities of alien life coming into contact with Earth.
What shapes, what forms, what evolutionary pattern they might take. Boy, that's the big mystery today. But of course things are going to evolve differently on another planet. And there's no reason that we would have humanoids. I mean, the chance of finding humanoids that look like us, like you see in Star Trek, are so unbelievably small. You're going to get intelligent creatures, but they may not look anything like we would even relate to an intelligence. There's no telling what could be possible, but since we don't have anything in our hands to look at and compare, I mean, I'd love to bring one of these guys into a real lab and have everybody take a look at it.
David, you just said that there's no evidence of extraterrestrial life right now.
we think we may have something here.
Wait a minute. Guys, what am I looking at?
This skull was found in a cave in northern Mexico. It was carbon dated to 900 years ago. Look at the eye sockets, look at the shape of the head, and look at the neck.
I'm curious, any DNA samples from this?
The mitochondrial DNA is human. They did the nuclear DNA test and could not sequence the father's DNA from the nucleus of the cell.
Are you saying this was a cross with an alien or just a human with a terrible deformity?
That's one theory. It's a hybrid.
Prove it.
So, they take it to the Harvard guy. He says he wants to get one of these guys into a laboratory, and he says to them, prove it. He doesn't say, can I take this skull into my laboratory? Because he knows what it represents. This is why you won't get any disclosure. In other words, you have to look at this information for yourself and do it for yourself. Now, that research has now been run into the ground by none other than Melanie Young, who's the owner of the skull, and Mel Fabregas. They have now declared, collectively, I'm summarising it massively, that is a human skull with hydrocephaly. That was done a couple of years ago, about 4 years after Lloyd Pye died. And I've written that up in my book. They did a new investigation with this woman who has connections to the US military, and she declared that the old investigation needed to be thrown out, and her investigation says that it's a human skull. And I've written that up in my book and on my website if you want to go into all the gory details. We're getting short of time, I haven't really got onto the... and Melanie Young now says it's a hydrocephalic skull, despite what she said in that first part of that clip I just showed you. So yeah, that, as far as I'm concerned, you've looked at the replica of a skull of an alien being. That's all I can tell you really. Everything that I've seen about that skull says that it's not from around here. You get Lloyd Pye's book, which covers some of that. There's another book by him, but it only goes up to 2007. I'm only going to get a bit of time now because I'm getting up to time. Probably will take some questions. I'm probably going to skip through these very quickly. So I've got some other stuff I want to show you. Again, it's quite a complex issue. I've got more information in the book. These things were originally seen starting in the 1600s, was one of the earliest reports, 1686. You got this comes up quite frequently when you start to look at the history. 1678, you have this Moyne Devil, the crop formations. 1880, we've got a report, and some of these were written up in Nature.
Don't worry about going over 10 because the salts and everything.
Okay, all right. Well, I'll do a bit more on this then. So this was quite a famous case. I did a little bit more investigation into this more recently. This Tully saucer nest, where this is actually in a swampy area. These are like reeds. I thought it was just grass, but it's actually a lagoon with reeds growing in it. And the farmer actually saw a saucer land there, and then it sort of went away, and this pattern was left. So this is where there's been this connection between flying saucers and crop circles. Although it's one of the few where this has actually been seen. There aren't many where they've seen actually objects flattening out the crops. It appears to be something else, but you can look into that. Developed in the 70s. Colin Andrews started to do research in the late 70s, early 80s. He became very famous, and he found out that you could distinguish certain types of crop formations because by then the outright hoaxing had started. And you had, that's a picture I actually took in 1987. My brother used to live in Wiltshire at that time. He's moved to South France now. But this was a picture I took from, it was near Silbury Hill. I can't remember the exact location. But there you see a simple ring with 4 satellite rings. Then got more complex in the 1990s. You had these pictograms. A version of this was famously used on the cover of one of the Led Zeppelin albums. I forget the title of it. There's a bit of a story behind that apparently. And then you got some enormous formations like this one, which was at Milk Hill, 14th of August 2001, with like 200 circles, and you're thinking, somebody with planks and string did that. Really? Really? And I actually did a bit of counting. I used some websites and I generated some crop circle counts, put them into an Excel spreadsheet. I did this a couple of years ago, so it goes up to 2016. And putting those onto a graph, you actually see, I was surprised because they peaked in the early 90s, 1991, and then most sources show that there was a steady sort of decline in the numbers, and that decline really sort of was going on right until the present day from the counts that I looked at. And some of the counts showed a sharp decline in a bit before 2001. Let's see, yeah, and then so they've tried to explain crop formations in various ways. One way is that they claim there's an interaction with the solar wind, and you get like a plasma cloud in the sky, and then you get the solar wind coming in and the charge builds up and it forms a vortex, and you get these balls of light which are commonly seen around crop formations, and then that ends up creating a formation on the ground. But I don't buy it, not if you consider the Milk Hill formation, and particularly one or two I'll show you in a minute. And you get burn marks in the stems. This has been observed at a number of sites. BLT Research, that's the website where you get a lot of this information. But this is from another study that was done in 1991, and this is somewhere near where I live. This was in Mansfield in Nottinghamshire. These stems were taken from, and some crop circles were found there. And there are effects measured on the plants as well, where they'll take plants out of the circle, and they'll take plants that are not in formation, and they'll germinate them, or let them germinate, or let them grow the next year, and they grow to different lengths. So there's some energy involved here. There's some sort of energy which has affected the plants and the growth of the seeds. And I just want to try and get some of this in. I realise I'm going through this very quickly. And there are separate presentations on this on YouTube that I've done, where I cover this in a bit more depth, some of it. But this circle from 1999 was particularly interesting because they managed to get soil samples from this circle from underneath the formation. And what they found was these. In the soil samples they found these iron microspheres, which were about 10 to 40 microns in diameter, and they were magnetised, they were stuck together. This is from the soils underneath where the crop formation was. This is a very important finding. Now again, you'll see this name, W.C. Levengood, you may not be able to read it, because it's quite small text. He gets a lot of flack saying that he was a PhD and blah 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 blah. I've put some of that in my book, and I don't really worry too much about that. These are his pictures, these are what they show. Another scientist called Robert C. Reynolds, he basically said that the soils showed the effects of being heated to between 600 and 800 degrees centigrade. Yet the crop that was on the top wasn't burned. That would have basically set the crop on fire, it would have been charred and burned if it really had. So the soil was showing the heating, the crop formation wasn't. Crop formations have happened where there is a big chalk aquifer in Wiltshire. It's the biggest chalk aquifer in Europe. So has that got something to do with it? Well, I think it has, because I think there's some interaction between energy. And energy can be affected by the flow of water. That energy can be affected by the flow of water. I mentioned that in the book. And there's an experiment which was done by Lord Kelvin showing that water droplets can create an electric discharge. Kelvin spark gap generator. So just to I've skipped over a lot of things, but the crops, interesting crop circles grew from the mid-1980s to about 1990 over a period of 10 years. And Colin Andrews did something called Operation Blackbird in 1990, employing the UK military. It's all on his website. A year after that, 1991, was when this big Doug and Dave story came out, and they said that they'd hoaxed all these formations with a plank and some string and and whatnot, and they went and made some formations in a field. They claimed that they'd faked all these circles. And the Circle Makers group, we should go and look at, that was investigated by Richard D. Hall in 2009. That group, the Circle Makers group, has apparent connections to MI5. Why would MI5 be interested in hoaxing crop circles, do you think? This is from their website. This is one of the... They didn't hoax this exactly. They did this as for part of the album cover for the Levelers, I think this one was. So they were paid to make this, you know, with agreement from whoever. So yeah, it looks like some of the other formations, true enough. But again, if you look at how crop formations might be made, this is where we start to get onto microwaves again. Is some sort of microwave beam being used from a platform and shone down into the fields to make these formations? Well, again, going back to Operation Blackbird, it was the year after this that they just basically shut down the whole crop circle phenomenon. They did a Channel 5 documentary, they had the Doug and Dave article in the press, and they basically said it was all Doug and Dave doing it. They shut it down. And it happened just, as I say, the year after the military got involved and Colin Andrews was getting the attention of government involved.
From Wiltshire, Clarence Mitchell.
They watched and waited all night, but without success. The monitors of Operation Blackbird no nearer to solving the mystery of the crop circles.
This is him in 1990.
As dawn arrived over Wiltshire, it was clear the circles had chosen not to appear in front of the specialised cameras and microphones. Last night, optimism was high. The fields being watched had a history of circles appearing in previous years. The observers were briefed to watch for any sign of a circle's arrival, from amber lights in the sky to electronic noises.
We're very confident we're in the right place. This is certainly the most active area anywhere in the world. That's been well established since 1980.
The latest circles to appear just a few miles away are the most spectacular yet. Theories on what causes them include alien messages delivered by spacecraft, rapidly swirling winds, or elaborate hoaxes. The men behind Operation Blackbird are convinced the circles show some degree of intelligence in their formation. They don't believe them to be hoaxes. The observers are undaunted at their lack of success on their first night. They've still got 3 weeks of watching to go. They're confident they will be the first people to solve the mystery by witnessing and recording a circle actually being made.
The mystery of the circles, more from Wiltshire later.
So again, you can read into that on Colin Andrews' website. And he's a funny character, Colin Andrews. I'm going to say a bit more about him shortly. This again, you know, leads you to understand there's something else going on. If people are stomping boards on the field, is it really going to have these residual effects in the soil so that the next year you can see the pattern from the previous year in the ground? Really? Maybe, if there's enough pressure, but I think it's highly unlikely. I think this is an energy imprint. You got talk of Mayan symbolism. This is going back to 2009. They were building up to 2012. A lot of these formations were about Mayan, the Mayan calendar and the Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent. But I don't buy all of that, at least not in that way. And then in 2010, I started asking the question: why were we getting all these symbols to do with Mayan symbolism, these crop formations, I should say, and why didn't we have any with Christian symbolism in it? And lo and behold, just after it was actually just before I asked myself this question at presentation, there was this image of what appears to be an image of the Turin shroud of the face of Jesus, or what's alleged to be Jesus, next to the M4. So that was one of the images which has Christian symbolism built into it. Now, just again, very quick trip through this is all in the book, which you can download for free. We got this message in 2001, and they even had to put a message on the SETI website, the NASA SETI website, and they were claiming that this couldn't possibly be a message from aliens, but it's very peculiar. This was the formation that you saw in the previous picture, and what it was based on was this Arecibo message, which was a binary bitmap message which was sent out in 1974 with various sort of facts and figures about the Earth and human beings encoded into this sort of graphic here. And then the crop formation was a version of this where certain things were changed. And this this thing here was actually also shown in a circle, or a formation I should say, in year 2000. It was repeated. So this was very, very intricate, and it had a specific message in it. So who thought of doing that? Is this hoaxers? And then this one that's on the cover of my book. Now with this one, basically, they said this must be a hoax. This must be a hoax because it's far too intricate. But when you actually look at that, that is a message. And it's written in ASCII, which is the American Standards Code for Information Interchange. Which might give us a clue as to who really wrote it, perhaps. And the message, if you read it as a binary coded message, which is explained in this posting by Paul Vigay, I met Paul Vigay in 2006, it says, there were two versions that were published, one of which was slightly incorrect. The incorrect version was published on Linda Moulton Howe's website. Beware the bearers of false gifts and their broken promises. Much pain but still time. Believe, full stop. There is good out there. We oppose deception. Conduit closing, comma. That was the message that was encoded into that formation. So if you work that out, that is actually 1,000 bits of information. So if you go back to that picture, there are 1,134, if I remember correctly, zeros and ones encoded into that, just that formation. You imagine doing that with stamping on it and plank or wood. In other words, mechanically producing it. Do you think somebody could do it? Do you think somebody could do it? I don't think so. Anybody could do that.
Paul Vigay was found dead mysteriously, wasn't he?
Correct. It's in my book, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
He committed suicide, well, he allegedly committed suicide. Yeah. So he is quite an interesting chap. Now, I corresponded, you see there this name Osborne, Maurice Osborne, he also decoded this message correctly, as did Paul Vigay. Now I wrote to Maurice Osborne fairly recently because he actually reproduced his own crop formation like this in 2004 to send his message back. We welcome all who respect our free will. If you choose to help, then help us to help ourselves. There is good here too. We look for a reply. That's what he encoded by the same method, and you can see that's his circle that he made. He got permission from the farmer to do it. And I asked him, I said, how long did it take you to make that? It took 2 full days of hard work in daylight to make our reply. Crop circle with a message. I think it was helped by 3 or 4 people. So that gives you an idea of how long that formation must have taken. And that hasn't got the alien head and all that other stuff that's in it. So have we seen any instances of encoded messages using ASCII or binary or anything similar in anywhere else that's been presented to us? Yes, we have. Operation Blackjack was published as a kind of cartoon series, and it was about a possible terrorist nuclear attack on London. And it was like a sequence of slides, you know, like sort of like a comic strip, an adult comic strip. And on a couple of the slides, they had this. You see here, it says Union of North America, and this face and a barcode. And they had this number. This was just on one of the slides. It's still on the Internet Archive. This was on the UK Daily Telegraph website. Okay. So you take that sequence of numbers, and I checked this myself. It turns out that is hexadecimal code. If you know what hexadecimal code is, it's used in computing and programming. And if you put that into a hex to ASCII converter, the message that comes out is, this is not simply entertainment. That was an encoded message which was put in the Daily Telegraph in 2012. And there was another part of that as well that's in my book, and you can find various forum postings about it. So, I'm going to try and finish off quickly now. I showed you the iron microspheres because in 2008, 9, maybe it was 2010, Stephen E. Jones, who was a physics professor who worked at one time Los Alamos National Laboratories, produced this paper about the destruction of the World Trade Center. And he said that they'd found dust from the World Trade Center, they'd analysed it, and it had iron-rich microspheres in it of about 20 micrometers in diameter, which is exactly the same sort of thing that was found in Levengood's crop circle samples. And then the same spheres were found in soil near the Hesdalen lights. that was recovered from an apparition of the Hesdalen lights when they found some strange residue on a rock, and they found it had iron microspheres in it. The Hesdalen lights appears to be an energy phenomenon of some kind. That's been going on for 30, 40 years. You can read about that separately.
Å, fy fader! Jeg filmer det! Jeg har det på tape! Jeg har det her! Å, dæven!
Hva sier du? Hallo, jeg tok bilder!
Fy faen, det bare brent opp! Jeg zoomet, det bare splittet med flere...
Filmet du det?
Ja, jeg fikk det.
Got from the spectrogram. Freddie Silver was levitated when he was sitting in a crop circle. Levitation was also experienced by people during the events of the destruction of the World Trade Center. And I'd made a table, all these effects, which relate to both crop formations and the destruction of the World Trade Center. David Caton and Robert Hulse, they investigated and found these anomalous energy readings from a Geiger counter, Geiger Muller tube. There's a video that Robert Hulse sent me about that. And they did this investigation in this formation, which was 2006, I think. I've got the date somewhere, I can't remember the date. The Pusey Nautilus. So you've got this main formation here, and then you've got this little formation here. So what I wanted to show you is... right, yes. So this is the Pusey Nautilus with this trampled down, but originally it wasn't trampled down. And David Caton said this in the interview. Before it got trampled down, that's what was in this little side area, which is actually a very small version of the main circle. Anyone heard of a zoom facility on some type of equipment which draws a pattern? A projector that draws a pattern? That's the full version, that's a zoomed out version, a very much smaller version.
Like a pantograph thing.
Pantograph type effect, whatever you want to call it. So I think that a lot of the crop circles will be produced by technology. Technology probably owned by Black Ops military, which is what Jacques Vallée said. And I think what they were doing between the 2007 to 2009, they were injecting false information through crop circles into the New Age movement. All this Mayan 2012 awakening of human consciousness didn't happen really, or at least not to my way of thinking. We didn't all ascend into these spiritual beings and spiritual realms. Didn't happen. So yeah, we now know what happened to the World Trade Center. This was done with technology. It has similarities to what was seen in crop circles, and the UFO researchers have actually tried to cover some of this up. I'll just mention that briefly before we finish. This was taken, this toasted car parking lot. You saw this on the first slide. These cars were turned into rusting hulks on the day, yet some of the cars were okay. There is no other way that this was possible other than that being this was some type of energy which was in use. And this was about a quarter of a mile from the World Trade Center itself. So, and the dust cloud actually came through this parking lot. So it appears the cloud was energized in some way. And here's the upside down car, upside down fire truck, upside down car, upside down police car. Cars were levitated. Researchers won't talk about that, let alone the mainstream. We'll skip it. And it's to do with the Hutchison effect. I haven't got time to go through all of this, as I was skipping over it. But I just wanted to mention that you need to look into Hurricane Erin as well, which was part of the events of 9/11. Science Applications International Corporation, they actually helped out. They're a big black budget military contractor. They helped out with the production of the NIST reports about the destruction of the World Trade Center. They also go under the name of Leidos. They changed their name in 2013, or they split off as an offshoot company. And they're members of the Directed Energy Professional Society as well. They were sued by Dr. Judy Wood. They were mentioned by William Pauleck, and they were also mentioned, the book was mentioned by Paul Hellyer. He's one of the good guys. He's actually tried to disclose some of this information within the UFO research community. Nobody else will talk about it.
One additional person in Ottawa who would know is the Chief of Emergency Measures. And the reason I know is I interviewed the previous one who is now deceased. And he went to Langley, and the CIA asked him if he would like to see one of these craft. And they flew him to Area 51 and let him go inside one and observe it and make notes and all of this sort of thing. I guess presumably to be in better position to cope with it if one crashed here and he was involved in trying to do something positive about it. And but before he was allowed to go, he had to sign an oath of secrecy and not tell anybody. And during his life, he didn't tell anybody, including his wife. And an Air Force buddy phoned me, and he was dying with Lou Gehrig's disease. And at that point, he thought he should tell somebody. And so I made an appointment with him, and then my friend phoned and said, you better get in touch with him right away because he's just about on the edge. I phoned him. He gave me a full report of what he saw and the whole idea of the inside of the craft and this sort of thing, and the fact that he had been briefed in many things, but now he felt he could tell somebody, and he thought that I would be a good one to tell.
We find that high officials in the George W. Bush administration knew of the attack weeks in advance and made no effort to prevent it. On the contrary, the evidence points to complicity when we find that not just 2, nor 3 buildings collapsed, nor 4, nor 5, nor 6, but 7. Some, if not all, had been rigged for controlled demolition. But that isn't all. A new weapon of mass destruction was used that reduced the concrete and steel to dust before it reached the ground. If you have any doubts about this, get a copy of Dr. Judy Wood's book entitled, Where Did the Towers Go? 500 pages of meticulous evidence. The unfolding story reveals the greatest mass deception in history, with the most universally negative consequences. Far more important than the long lineups for security checks at airports. We have been stripped of our civil rights one by one, including, I regret to say, habeas corpus, reversing 800 years of progress.
Really? But Greer, Steven Greer, will not talk about 9/11. I've got a whole chapter on Greer in my latest book. Greer went and lived in Israel for 3 years. He had an abusive childhood. He says that in his own book. He talks about powers that be having advanced technology, but he will not talk about 9/11 and what happened. He started various free energy initiatives. This is going back to 2001. He started 3 different energy initiatives where he's asked for money to develop free energy devices. He called it Seize Power, he called it Project Orion, he called it Sirius Disclosure Technologies, he called it Space Energy Access Systems. Same thing, he's redone the same thing about 4 times over. And I've got all that documented in my book. Here's the original website that he designed in 2001. He shut that down and opened Project Aero in 2007. It's the exact same website, same content, same links, different name, and he claimed to have raised so much money with all of this, and he's still doing it now, as we speak.
Charges about £3,000 and £4,000 for his courses.
Yeah, yeah. I've heard that Greer's worth $14 million. That's what I've heard. And his witnesses talk about Science Applications International Corporation, who was sued by Dr. Judy Wood in relation to their cover-up of certain facts about 9/11. Greer knows all about SEIC.
And these meetings I had with Senator Goldwater have now been confirmed by the release from the Goldwater Library in the last month, back in March, about these meetings that I had with him. Now, here's the pièce de résistance, is that after this discussion, he started asking me, he says, well, who have you been briefing on this? And I said, well, you know, I briefed President Clinton's team and his CIA director, R. James Woolsey, and I've met with the head of the head investigator for the Senate Appropriations Committee. I've met with, and I went on and on. And he says, well, what are they? I said, well, they were in the same boat you were in, Senator. This kind of secret collegium of folks running this hadn't told them a thing. And that even when the president made inquiries, they wouldn't tell him anything. And when the CIA director made inquiries, they wouldn't tell him anything because it is so secret. And so he looked at me, he says, well, who is involved in this secrecy? So I started naming some people that I had learned from very reliable sources were members of this so-called Majestic Committee, it used to be called back in the Truman and Eisenhower era. And one of them was Admiral Bobby Ray Inman. And Admiral Inman had been head of the National Security Agency, but before then had been deputy director of the CIA, but at that time had gone on to the board of directors of Science Applications International Corporation, SAIC, which is a huge government contractor that has dealt with some of this stuff. And he says, I know, so when I started naming different names, he didn't know some of them, but when I landed on Admiral Bobby Ray Inman, he says, oh, I know Bobby Ray, I've known him for years. And I said, well, Senator Goldwater, would you pick up the phone and give him a call and see if we can meet to see if we can get some cooperation on making a change and disclosing this information, bringing this science and technology out so we can get out of Mideast oil and we can make a civilization here that works and that is free.
Yet he will not talk about what happened to the towers. I've got this whole transcript here.
Yes, sir.
There's compelling evidence that not just the towers, but the entire World Trade Center complex was destroyed by perhaps a directed energy type of weapon, something that was operated under technology of molecular dissociation. That seems to be very much related to what we're talking about. Have you looked at that?
I have looked at it. You know, I have bigger fish to fry. 9/11 was terrible. We lost 3,000 people. It led to 2 huge wars and trillions of dollars. I will tell you this. I'm not going to get into specifics. I mentioned a gentleman named Richard Foch, third highest guy, Richard Foch, at the Naval Research Labs. He was in meetings with the then Vice President of the United States, Cheney. And he said absolutely it was known about in advance and there was involvement at that level. And he told me, and I have witnesses, multiple witnesses to this, that if he were to speak of this, now he's passed away, that he, his wife, his children, and his grandchildren would all be killed. That's all I'm going to say on the 9/11 issue. But there is a lot to that story. I've never shared publicly what I just said, but the man has passed away. So it's not hard to, and I think most people get into these grand conspiracy theories. Basically, all you have to do is stand down. There's constant threat. There is terrorism out there. And you don't even have to hoax an event in that case. You just have to stand down the systems that would have intercepted it. You understand what I'm saying? So it's like when you're doing a code blue, boom, clear. You say clear before you do the electric shock. So you just clear the system, let it come in and hit. Now, what I think happened on 9/11 is more like what I just described. And I have very good reason to believe that because someone of that integrity and rank had a front row seat and knew about it. And I've never spoken of this before right now. But I think that it's disturbing It's enraging, but it's a minor rounding error compared to what's coming if we don't end this cartel's hegemony on the secrecy related to UFOs, ETs, what have you. 9/11 is going to be a very minor blip on the screen. So that's my warning to people. You can take it or not. But I've known what you just asked about since it happened. My whole security team lit up like you would believe when that happened. Yes, yes, ma'am.
So Greer is covering up. Greer, in other words, my point here is, I'll say it now, I'll probably say it again at the end. Greer is meant to be disclosing things. He is the disclosure person. He's not a president, he's not a politician. He is a guy running a website, going around the US, doing talks about disclosure, about the alien issue. Yet, he will not tell you what I've told you about 9/11, which is factual, provable, went to court. He will not talk about that.
Good morning, my name is Carol Rosen. In 1974, after being a 6th grade school teacher, I was introduced to the late Dr. Werner von Braun in the U.S., the father of rocketry. In my first meeting with him, during that first 3.5 hours, he said to me, Carol, you will stop the weaponization of space. And I said, you know, teachers don't stop until June. He said, no, you have to understand, this is February, and we have to prevent the weaponization of space because there is a lie being told to everyone that the weaponization of space is now first being based upon the evil empire, the Russians. There are many enemies, he said, against whom we're going to build this space-based weapon system, the first of whom was the Russians, which was existing at that time. Then there would be terrorists. Then there would be terrorists. Then there would be terrorists. Then there would be third world countries. Now we call them rogue nations or nations of concern. Then there would be asteroids. And then he would repeat to me over and over, and the last card, the last card, the last card would be the extraterrestrial threat. Well, at the time, I kind of laughed when he said asteroids, and when he said extraterrestrials, I knew I wasn't going to deal with that subject. And now we hear on the news just today, this week, that they've slid in another enemy. Only this time we're going to protect our satellites. In other words, we have to have some reason to spend these trillions to waste these dollars on a space-based weapon system, and they're all lies.
So this is the point. And what's happening now is you're getting this To the Stars Academy, and we've got this Louis Elizondo guy talking about this advanced threat assessment program in relation to studying UFOs. But this is what Carol Rosin was talking about. This is the Independence Day film, as you see from the caption. Same city. Empire State Building is destroyed. The only difference here is that in Independence Day there's an enormous flying saucer hovering over the building. I personally, I don't know about you, I can't ignore those similarities. They're trying to perception manage everyone. And Steven Greer is playing his part in that process, as is Stephen Bassett. He is also won't talk about 9/11. He will not mention that the World Trade Center was in fact destroyed by a directed energy weapon, which is known about by Applied Research Associates and Science Applications International Corporation. He was asked this question directly by a chap that I know in 2017, and that's me on the stage with him. And he just started talking about architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth.
Do you relate it and talk about it?
No, not anymore. I've got a recording of that. So yeah, I've mentioned this to TTSA. So they're trying to perception manage things. That is being run by the CIA. You can watch Dark Journalist report on that if you want. But To the Stars Academy, my advice is, if you want any advice, if you're interested in it, just ignore it. It's run by the CIA. There will be no disclosure of any value from that initiative. Same with Edgar Mitchell. He worked for the CIA. He talked about aliens and Roswell. He worked for the CIA. He says it himself in a video. I've got the clip here.
I was interested in telepathy, psychokinesis, and mental phenomenon and so forth. An American physician by the name of Andrea Puharich called me after I came back from the moon and said, I found this rather amazing Israeli young man who can do these sorts of things. Would you like to study him? And I was intrigued, and I told him, yes, bring him to the States and let's take a look. And then I set out to arrange the testing that we did with him at the Stanford Research Institute, where I met Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ. What I did not know at the time was that the work at SRI was also being funded by our CIA, and only discovered that later. As we finished our work with Uri at SRI, I was called by the head of the CIA and asked to come to Washington and brief him on what we had learned. And that head happened to be George H.W. Bush. He was head of the CIA at that point in time, and it turned out that it was all a part of the same big study. The Russians were studying it, we were studying it, the CIA was studying it, I was studying it, and so it was all a part of the so-called study of parapsychology. I didn't know at that time all the work that the CIA was involved in.
When I pointed out to Colin Andrews, he said that what I said about Edgar Mitchell, you know, threatening to kill people, which is what he did, we've got a recording of that. He said it was repugnant and with no evidence base. And I sent him the clip with Mitchell actually threatening to shoot somebody, and Colin Andrews didn't reply. So this is disclosure, this is my point. Colin Andrews is the sort of person that should be saying, God, I didn't know that about Edgar Mitchell. I never realised he threatened to shoot somebody and told somebody else that they'd get the head blown off, as in Bruce De Palma, if they played around with free energy. These are the people that are supposed to be doing the disclosure, or supporting it. Nick Pope, another one. He said, that's what he says on his website, paid spokesperson. He actually says that on the title of his website. Yeah, he's one of the pundits, he's on all this. He supports the official story of 9/11. He says it was done by Muslim terrorists. And I've got a clip of him saying that. He gets into the papers.
He's peering over alien from America.
Yeah, he's on every week. Yeah, so here's the clip. I won't play it all. But this is the clip by Anthony J. Hilder, where Hilder gets it wrong. But
Pope, formerly with the Ministry of Defense in England. Nick, may we use this on film?
You, certainly.
Okay. One always asks the question, why are we at war, both Britain and the United States, against Afghanistan? Why?
We're not at war with Afghanistan. We are, however, at war with elements of Al-Qaeda and the Taliban, on the basis that they are not only terrorists, but they are exporting that terrorism to the Western world, as we've seen on many occasions.
When did they export terrorism to the Western world?
Al-Qaeda has exported terrorism on numerous occasions, the USS Cole, the embassy bombs, 9/11, and all sorts of other attacks.
Wait, you say 9/11. 9/11, according to most people who have done a thorough investigation, is an inside job.
No, it's not.
You say no.
I worked for government for 21 years. I know what governments do, I know what governments don't do. And, you know, I've looked at both sides of this. Mm-hmm. I've looked at the conspiracy theories. I've looked at the 9/11 Commission report.
Can you tell me how a building could come down with simply the burning of jet fuel, which Jet A fuel burns at about 700 degrees, to melt steel? It's going to take 2,200. How could that defies logic?
This is one of the popular.
How is it?
This is one of the popular misconceptions of 9/11. For the building to collapse, you don't need the steel support structures to melt, which, as you say, does happen at a higher temperature than aviation fuel burns. What you do need is for the steel to lose its structural integrity, and that happens at a much lower temperature. So the physics and the engineering is not in. Well, I've spoken to people who.
So you get the idea. That was Nick Pope saying that steel loses its structural strength. What actually happened is the buildings turned mostly to dust before they hit the ground. And anybody that watches the videos can see that. Yet this guy is meant to be a disclosure guy. And to emphasise the point, he said a few years ago, this quote's come from Colin Andrews' website, I had to refute the bizarre idea that the formations, as in crop formations, which I just showed you a few slides of, were caused by the testing of space-based directed energy weapons and dispel suggestions that media coverage of the issue had been stifled by the use of denoisers. So he was apparently asked to refute the bizarre idea of the use of directed energy weapons in crop formation.
As far as I'm concerned, Nick Pope is just disinformation.
Correct.
Because after approximately 20 years
Correct.
of investigating UFOs, he hasn't come to a conclusion yet.
Correct.
I can confirm that in
And the point I'm trying to make is that most of the UFO circuit is not that much different to that. And I've written all that up extensively in my books. And so you get to the point where when an honest but ignorant person learns an uncomfortable truth, they either cease to be ignorant or they cease to be honest. I forget who's, that's a slightly modified version of somebody else's quote, but it's true. And that's what I found with the UFO research community in general. They don't say, oh yeah, Apollo can't have landed on the moon. Yeah, now you mention it, and now I've looked at it. You know, they back it up. And in fact, Bob Lazar did it in a recent interview with Joe Rogan, claiming that Apollo landed on the moon.
the Netflix popular or people in it.
Pardon?
Was it Netflix
Yes,
documentary?
yeah. He was on Joe Rogan podcast.
Did they land beside the Lancasters?
Sorry?
Did they land beside the Lancasters that were on the moon? Did you see that?
Maybe. So, my bag really is that, I mean, I posted an article a couple of years ago, which I called it Agenda 22, and I stated that the goal of my efforts in finding and showing people the truth, what that is, I hope that by the 22nd century, all humans will be free and sovereign. There will be no slavery and no exploitation. All people will have access to responsible use of free energy, cheap non-toxic health treatments, and even star travel if they wish. There will be no advantage for anyone believing a particular set of ideas, that they will be free to believe or not to believe what they like with no penalties or restrictions. People will understand the difference between belief and knowledge, and they will value knowledge more highly than belief. Right? So that's the big problem here. We get all this talk about beliefs. Do you believe in UFOs? No. I actually do research to find evidence to prove what's happened in a particular case. No group will be able to influence knowledge or beliefs for their own gain, and no group or individual will be controlled by any other unless they wish to be controlled. Self-determination in a way never seen on Earth before. That's what I want to happen. These goals will not be reachable while we're influenced by psychopaths, liars and ignorant people, and those who are not willing to admit that they've made a mistake. And that's basically just I tried to sort of put this into a big picture. That's what I ended up with. You've got to look at, crop circles, consciousness, religion, secret space program, UFOs, Apollo hoax, oil and the energy cartel, banking, international. It's all connected. You can't ignore any one field. And so a secret space program, I'm convinced, exists. I don't know exactly what form it takes, but the evidence shows that. Human consciousness is not restricted to the body alone. I think everyone should develop an appreciation for that if they haven't already. Control of all types of energy, electrical, magnetic, conscious and life energy, has been developed to a very high level by those running the planet. And it's been weaponized. The Apollo missions were a hoax. Weather modification and control exists, and talk of CO2 and global warming is a lie. It's a lie. And it's been promoted to advance the global control agenda in the form of Agenda 21, if you've not looked at that, and that's in one of my other books. I haven't got any copies of that book here because I sold out, but again, it's a free download. And most of the organisations which are in our world now and run things, they need to be just completely, rebooted basically and turned into something else. Because they can't, the way that they work at the moment is not compatible with knowing the truth about what I've shown you here today. So that is basically it. We've been attempts at UFO disclosure since at least 1950. Nothing has really much changed in my view. People who aren't actually co-opted or by the CIA are heavily influenced by those that are co-opted. And the armies of trolls out there trying to just shoot a lot of this down or say it's not true or whatever, and they promote cases with flimsy evidence, and they repeat old information as new, which is the case with this Admiral Wilson stuff. A lot of that stuff came out well over 10 years ago, and it's now being represented as if it's new information. It's not, and you can find out that it's not new if you do the research. So that is basically it, really. We've run a bit over time, and I think Kennedy, I think he got to know some stuff, I'm not sure how much. So it's now over to you to do your own disclosure to yourself. I don't think anybody's going to do it for you.
Okay, well, thanks very much for it.
Thank you very much for listening. If anybody's got any energy left, some questions.
We're going to do, can we have
after I've given his presentation.
Yeah, Maureen wants to present it. So.
All right, okay.
I've got a presentation for you.
Thank you very much.
I think there's sort of much links to like the occult and like when you look at like Aleister Crowley's land.
That I think comes into the side of conscious energy, you know, manipulation of conscious energy, which is, I mean, I think if you start to look at black magic, that's what it's to do with. It's how you manipulate this life force energy and this sort of spiritual energy. And yeah, people like Aleister Crowley, or Crowley as some people like to say, yeah. And you know, you probably saw the image in that's being put out with that entity called Lamb, which looked like a grey alien, which Aleister Crowley drew in 1930s or 40s or whatever. So that's quite unusual.
The guy who started JPL.
Sorry?
The guy who started JPL.
Jack Parsons, yeah, he was a follower of Aleister Crowley, wasn't he? Yeah. Carl James has written a bit about that in his book, Science Fiction and the Hidden Global Agenda. So yes, the occult symbolism, Masonic symbolism, that factors into all of this somewhere.
Bohemian Grove is evidence of that, where you're trying to get bankers and people in power around the world. If you listen to what the priests are saying, I think they're invoking dark spirits.
I agree.
To go over them and influence them. Because the dark spirits want to hold the planet up, as well as dark angels.
I agree.
That's why
this gentleman here, sorry.
I've heard something that in Germany, 1930s, there was this group called the Vril Society.
Yes.
Like a spiritualist channeling group, and there was this young woman with a long flexion
black
hair who was supposedly giving information to the Nazis, and that's how they got their anti-gravity technology and stuff, and then it was passed on through Operation Paperclip. Anything in that?
I don't know. I've read some of that stuff as well, and there's talk of a landing on the moon in 1920 and landing on Mars in 1962, which was by, as you say, the Vril Society or the Vril people. I don't know what to make of that. Again, if you read Nick Cook's book, he talks about the case of Victor Schauberger, and he wasn't part of the Vril Society, to my understanding. And so I do think there was research into saucer-type technology done in Nazi Germany. I'm not sure exactly what form it took. I write a little bit about that in the Secret Space Program book. I think if I mention the Vril Society at all, it's only like in one sentence. So yeah, I've read that stuff. Don't quite know what to make of it. Maybe there was contact going on there, and maybe it did influence Hitler to talk about this Aryan race. I'm not sure.
Getting back to the moon, do you think there's any truth in this story that there's helium-3 in abundance?
I think that's probably, they can probably measure that spectroscopically if you use a spectroscope. I think, so that probably is true. But helium-3, again, it's just that they're saying, oh, you could use it to create hydrogen or something, or use it for a hydrogen.
They're supposed to be able to use it for what we use uranium for, without the waste product.
We use it for what, sorry?
We use depleted uranium for atomic energy.
Right, yes, so yeah, they use
that. They can use that instead.
I think they're trying to claim they could use it for a type of fusion energy, I think.
Deuterium fusion.
That's it, isn't it? Yeah. But you don't need to use fusion energy. If you look at fusion reactors as a general thing, they've always been 20 years in the future, and since the 50s, and they're still 20 years in the future even now.
There's one in Oxford, but it's not very tokamak.
Not very strong. You can get it to produce a net input for about 5 nanoseconds or something, can't you? A net output of however many joules or watts. But
from my research with the crop circles, I certainly believe there's some pranksters, the Prankster would, others are being employed by the MI5 to cover or give disinformation out, and open to the energy weapon idea from satellites or the TR3B to give out disinformation. But from my research, and I've gone to Avery over many years, and I actually grow wheat, so I know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
I've actually seen a crop bent on the second or third node. I think it was the second node and nowhere else, so you couldn't do that with
yeah, that's right.
Now I'm not sure if an energy weapon could do that mine either.
Well, I
talk about 20 to 30 centimetres above the ground.
Well, I think what it might be is what they're doing is they're creating a gravity field.
Right.
So if you imagine you can create a force of gravity which is 6 inches above the ground and stops. So above that you've got, you know, higher gravity than you have, you know, below that.
Target the second node.
You could. I think you could do it to that fine level if you've got a gravity field which you can control in that way and simulate there being a weight on there. You know, maybe you could do that.
Out of interest, though, I'll accept that as a possibility. Are you open to the fact there may be some other force at play doing a minority? Because I've actually seen an orange orb down 100 acres, Eastfield, with a group of travellers, and the BBC film crew filmed it. And when it came down the hill, I said, "Did you get that?" And they looked stunned, and they said, "Yeah." "Did you get any noise?" "No." And it was an orange orb going over Adam's Grave, Long Barrow, going over Knapp Hill, and it lasted a minute and a half.
These have been filmed, haven't they? I mean, there's quite hundreds of them on film.
The last thing is Charlie Mallet.
Charles Mallet, yeah.
Oh, you know him?
Yeah, not personally, but I know his name, yeah.
Yeah, in the crop circle, he actually saw an orange orb come out the ground. And finally, when I've been down there, I've had people show me white orbs of light dancing over the crop circles, and that's not photoshopped. They just filmed it a few hours before I got there, and I think they're telling the truth. So I just wonder if a minority is a positive conscious energy getting back to the aquifers.
Could be, you know, I don't.
The water with, you know,
I don't rule that out, and I go into that a little bit more in the book than I've had a chance to today. And the orbs thing, yes, that's very, very interesting. And I think that the orbs have also been seen in 1 or 2 cases of cattle mutilation. So is this the non-lethal weapon that's being used? You know, does it actually glow orange when it's in operation? Or is it, as you suggest, some type of conscious energy which is, you know, benevolent or benign, and maybe there was some type of program to put messages in crop circles. You know, it's a strange way to communicate, but maybe it's true. Maybe these forces chose to communicate in that way for whatever reason, and then the military got wind of it and thought, we can't be having this. We've got to, you know, muddy the waters of this, and then they started doing stuff. Yeah, I'm certainly open to that possibility. You know.
Andy Moussan, do you think he's stupid or just a little bit gullible?
I think he's just a bit of an opportunist.
Yeah,
I think he's, you know, I think he knows how to make money out of the issue. And I mean, some of the stuff he's come out with is pretty interesting, you know. But
absolutely, and I just wonder why he gets involved with things like the Roswell slides, which are quite obviously bullshit.
Yeah, you know. Exactly. So you know, you can only say, well, he must be in it to make.
I quite like some of his older stuff, but in more recent years, he's just like, and I'm thinking, is he an idiot, or is he just like a bit gullible?
I don't know, but I know that Lloyd Pye didn't like him, so you know, I'll tell you that much. But yeah, I don't know Richard, but I feel the same. That what you said. Any other questions or comments? £10 for the books. I was saying download them for free. Yes, Andy?
Do you think any of the Apollo astronauts actually went to the moon using non-rocket technology?
I think probably not, because if they did, they'd kind of have to like be a double cover-up. In other words, they'd have to say, we actually went to the moon, but in a secret craft, and they wouldn't, you know, they would have to have clearance to be aboard that craft, etc., etc. So I think it makes far more sense that they were mind controlled or hypnotised, whatever you want to call it, to make them believe they walked on the moon, but actually they did it all in the studio. But there may have been other missions to the moon, they may have taken some shots there and released those as being part of Apollo perhaps, I don't know. Currently I don't think that's what's happened, but again, I wouldn't say I've studied every single Apollo photograph, whether there are 6,000 of them or however many there are, 11,000, I can't remember. I think it was shot in a studio, none of the astronauts went there. If they have been with other missions, I don't think there's any photographs or public videos being released as if it came from the Apollo mission.
Do you think NASA will ever tell us the truth about Apollo?
Well, probably not, but you know, then you've got the Interstellar film, haven't you, the Christopher Nolan film, where, you know that clip, don't you, where he says, oh, we've had to take all the federal textbooks out and replace them with the real information.
Yeah.
You know, so I don't know.
But it's interesting as well, the movies, I mean, you got The First Man last year, there's another space movie coming out.
Yeah.
They're trying to reinforce
what
happened 50 years ago.
Yeah.
Do you think the International Space Station's for us?
I think
you're using the vomit comment.
Oh, lovely, thanks.
the clips are very short.
I think there is disinformation being put out regarding the International Space Station. As regards the International Space Station, you can see it. If you know where to look, you can observe it for yourself. The ISS, you can observe it. So you can definitely see that it's real. You can actually observe the structure of it. Yeah, you can if you've got a good enough telescope. There's people that have made YouTube videos. And they're not NASA people, they're just enthusiasts. So you can definitely see it. And you can see its shape. Whether there's anybody inside it or not, you know, you could make that argument.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure there is some inside it. And I think they've tried to use, because you find that a lot of these people that are questioning the authenticity of the ISS videos are flat earthers. A large proportion of them are. I'm not saying they all are, but a large proportion of them are.
Do you think there's a red Tesla heading to Mars?
Well, that's another... Why would there be, you know? Why would you want to put a car into space? It's weird, isn't it? I couldn't really work that one out, I must admit. I thought it was totally weird.
But he's a shell, though, isn't he?
I think so, yeah.
For rocket technology, he's a shell.
I think so, yes. Yeah. So I think he knows about the secret stuff, or some of it.
Is there any free energy devices available?
Free energy devices, yes, there are several. There are several that have been made available, but the problem with all of them that I've seen is the best you're going to get out of them is that they'll maybe run for an hour, a couple of hours, and then they'll break, or they'll need to be taken apart and new bearings put in or something, whatever it is. So as I've said in a couple of postings, if you want to have a free energy device that's reliable, you need to get into a big factory and have maybe £500,000 to make it into something that can be put into operation 24/7. Because you know, a lot of these people say, "Oh, you've invented a free energy device. Why aren't you running your house on it then?" And the reason I think is because the quality of the components and the manufacturing is relatively low, so it doesn't run well. And I've actually gone to see a guy based in Shrewsbury who showed me a device he'd made, and that fitted into that category. It would work, but only for very short periods of time, and then it would break. So this is one of the problems. There was a good device published, shown about 4 or 5 years ago by a Turkish guy called Yildiz. If you put Yildiz device onto YouTube, you'll see it running. But again, after about an hour, it would heat up, and he had to switch it off and take it all apart and put some new component in it. And there is another video by John Bedini where he talks about a device which was actually sold in 1950s, I think it was. And people used to run their camper vans off it. But it used this Bosch generator. And then, again, it would only run for maybe a total of, 300 hours, something like that. And then the generator would break, and it needed the commutator replacing, and you couldn't get the parts. And so it fell into disuse, and it was forgotten about. And that was I think it was in the 40s or 50s.
No more questions? Hey!